Sarah Rice, and she's going to talk to us about creating objective measures for evaluating UX frameworks as the title of our talk comes. Just give a little bit of background here on Sarah. She is an information architect, and she's been doing that for about 20 years. She has her own consultancy in San Francisco. She also teaches as an adjunct faculty member in the California College of the Arts. So I'm going to hand it off since she knows her talk better than I do.
Thank you.
Get started.
Thanks, Tom. Appreciate that. Good morning. How's everybody doing today?
Good.
I'm interested, how many people are here from the Seattle area? How many people got here on an airplane? Okay, cool. I got here on an airplane, just FYI. Yeah, I've been doing information architecture for about 20 years, and now I'm teaching at California College of the Arts, teaching a course in systems, which is mainly information systems, so I'm kind of teaching information architecture to interaction design students there. And I'm wanting to talk to you today about objective measures for evaluating UX frameworks, which is kind of a mouthful, so I'm going to break that down for you. Objective as opposed to subjective, because really I'm kind of tired of people going, well, I don't like that. You know, I mean, maybe that doesn't happen to you in your work, but, you know, I'll put something together and they're like, well, I don't like that. And I'm like, why? I'm like, well, because I don't like it. Because my mom can't use it. Because, you know, my all-time favorite example was working in a company and the CEO didn't like the color red. Therefore, all user experience decisions were made based on, is it red or is it not red? So really wanting to find something a little more objective than, I don't like that. And focusing on UX frameworks, so the user experience can, talking about user experience can be kind of broad, especially, you know, as we're in the field, and it's like, you know, is it visual design, is it structure, is it interaction, is it, you know, how the words are placed or what they say. And so for me, I'm an information architect, so I'm really interested in the underlying structure. What is that framework that we build everything else on? Because I think if we have the framework right, then everything else will go more smoothly. All right, let's see if we can get that up and running again. So really, the question, maybe it'll work, maybe it won't. Hold on, we'll give it a jiggle. The question that I ask myself often is, there we go. How do I know how to evaluate my work? How do I know that the work that I'm doing is good? How do you know that the work that I'm doing is good? You know, I can tell you I've been doing it for 20 years, so maybe that, you know, holds some water with some folks. Maybe. Maybe there's some people in the field who've been doing work for a long time that maybe they do or don't know what they're talking about. How do I know? How do you know that the work that we're doing is good? A few years ago, Jesse James Garrett was at an information architecture summit, and he asked the same question. How do we know if the work that we're doing is actually good? We've talked a lot about, you know, what kind of process do we use, what are the deliverables that we use, and should they be this way or that way, or should we do it this way or that way? You know, how do we do our work? But really, when it comes to like the finished thing, how do we know that we're actually doing good work? And this is the dude that, you know, he wrote the book. So if he's asking that question, then maybe it's a question worth asking. You know, he wrote the book, he put together a famous model, like, you know, maybe he knows a thing or two. And so really the question is, you know, how do we measure what it is that we do? How do we do it objectively so that people can kind of understand, so that we can talk about it, so we can all talk about it as a community, so that we can use the same language and have the same measures, so that when you talk about is something usable and I talk about something usable, then we're talking about the same thing. Or, you know, there's other measures as well besides usability. So I know for a long time we've been, you know, have taken from the field of marketing, you know, we have metrics. I work on a project, we measure it, we decide it's successful or not. I've got a couple good examples of that. Worked on a project for eBay, re-architected their entire help content, their help section. This is a while ago. It was a huge project, took a long time, a lot of rounds of user testing. It was a really large project. It launched, and it was deemed very successful. They measured improved customer satisfaction. They had reduced the number of incoming customer service emails, which is what they wanted. And through surveys, users reported finding information more quickly and easily because of the organization and the layout. So definitely very successful. Thumbs up. Yay. Worked on another project for PayPal. They have a security center, and the information was completely confusing, a lot of legalese. Nobody understood what the agreements were and the services offered by PayPal. So we came in, we restructured the content, published a new security site, and again, it was very successful. Reduced down to 24 pages from 72, and used a lot less legalese, just plain language so that people knew what we were talking about. Measurably improved findability, satisfaction, and comprehension of information, and also decreased the amount of that it cost to actually maintain because we were publishing it across multiple sites. So again, thumbs up. So when I ask, how do we know if what we're doing is good or not? We have these measures. Isn't that good enough? Is that good enough? Well, for me, when I first started information architecture, a lot of what I did was working on websites. Very important. Now what I do is, is it a website? Is it an app? Is it a software interface? Is it even online? Is it online or offline? It's like the things have evolved to the point that we can't just talk about websites anymore. We can't just talk about click-through rates. Some of the metrics that we've used in the past are great for websites, and even these two examples, they're not complete and total websites. They're just portions of a website. And that PayPal and eBay, they both have apps. So what about the underlying structure of the app versus the website? Versus Redbox has an app and a kiosk. And what about when you leave both of those things behind and I take my movie and go home? And there's still the user experience continues whether I'm on the website or not. How do we measure that? How do we measure that across different channels? So that's basically like the question that I've been having, and kind of pondering and wondering what's the best way to do that. So one of the things that I did to kind of help answer the question is I went to a lot of different resources, thanks to Abby Covert also, who did some work along these lines as well. She put together an IA heuristic. So Jacob Nielsen has some good information about usability and what makes for good usability. So do Lou Rosenfeld and Peter Morville. They have a lot of good information about what makes a good IA. Rosmini and Rosati have good information about how to handle information architecture when it's not just in one channel, across multiple channels. And we have a wonderful international standards organization that also provides some guidelines around what makes for a good website, what makes for good software interaction. And so when you kind of put all these things together, combine the things that are similar, figure out what's unique about them, you can come out with something that looks a little bit like this. A series of questions that you can ask about anything that you work on, regardless of what channel it's on. And I've kind of broken them out into 3 buckets, mainly because I saw like a list of 10 or 12 things, and I can't remember 10 or 12 things, but I can remember 3 things, which I find really helpful. So on the far left, we have usability, and a lot of this is just like very basic. If I am a user, can I complete my task? Can I actually do the thing that I was supposed to be here to do? Can I get my movie from Redbox? Can I play the movie in my whatever device? Can I buy or sell things on eBay? And then in support of that, are things consistent or flexible? And just to let you know, I have 3 areas here, usability and value. I'm going to go over briefly, and it's navigation, the one in the middle that I'm going to spend a lot of time on, because that is fairly unique to information architecture and structures, and being able to get that part right can take you a long way. So usability is, it's like just basic, can I actually get my thing done? Over here on the other side, value. Value, these are the questions that, like one of the ones that I really like is it useful? Can I actually, which is not usable. It's the so what question that I ask a lot whenever I'm working on a project. It's like, so we're building this really cool thing. Is it helpful? Is it, is anybody going to use it? Does it fill a need? Down here is like, is it elegant? Is it elegant? Apple makes pretty elegant products. Or does it make me work too hard? Is it the Microsoft Word version that packs a ton of features into something, so maybe you can use it, maybe you can't? Is it elegant? So that's usability and value, but really the thing in the middle has a lot to do with the structure of things. What is the structure of something? And is the structure going to, can you evaluate what the structure is no matter what channel it's in or if it spans across different channels? The questions you ask are, does it make sense to the user? So, and in a minute I'm going to show you different examples. I think it's helpful to kind of see different examples of what I'm talking about, and the examples span multiple channels. We have a website, we have a brick and mortar store, we have a poster, we have enterprise software, and we have a completely offline experience. So in all those situations, are we building something that actually makes sense to the user? And not just makes sense to us, but does it make sense to whoever it is that we're building it for? Is it clear and comprehensible? Are things well organized? And can somebody find their way around? A lot of these things deal with wayfinding, sense-making, place-making, which we've known about for a while. I originally was going to call this just navigation, but when when it comes to dealing with offline environments and offline experiences, it's a lot easier to talk about wayfinding rather than navigation, although they tend to be the same thing. So examples, the best way to kind of understand, okay, how can I evaluate something using these questions? So I've got a few different examples for you. The Apple Store. Apple Store is very, I go there all the time, and it does a pretty good job according to the criteria. When you look at the underlying framework, how things are organized, what the user experience framework is, it does a pretty good job. So starting with, does it make sense to the user? Well, it presents itself as a store. We know that because it says Apple Store. We have a pretty good sense of what people want to do when they're here. They want to shop. It uses the term shop. It even has a little cart up there. So it taps into a user's mental model of, oh, this is a store. I have a basic idea of what a store is. I go in. I'm interested in finding something that I might want to buy. Maybe I buy it, maybe I don't. But things are kind of set up that way. So you assume that when you're here in a store that there's products that you're going to look at, that maybe you're going to buy them, if all goes well. Does it make sense to the user? Yes. Is it clear and comprehensible? Does it use plain language? Do people know, what it is they have to offer? Well, they kind of, have that up front, showing pretty well. Clear and comprehensible. Is it well organized? Yeah, it does a good job. They put all the computers in one area, all the phones in another area, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You could make an argument for, they use the term iPad or iPod or iPhone. Phone is easier, but iPad, there could be an argument for not putting branded terms in your navigation, but it's Apple. Everybody knows what an iPad is, most likely. But yeah, things are pretty well organized. And can a user find their way around? In general, yes. So, so as a website, it does pretty well using these evaluation criteria. So if we move on to something that's not a website, So we go to a user experience that is not a website. That's actually, this is the store that I go to whenever I need something from Apple and I want to show up at a brick and mortar store. We can use the same criteria. Does it make sense to the user? Well, it's a store. It's on the street with a bunch of other stores. It has the iconic Apple appearance to it. Does it make sense to the user? Yes. Is it clear and comprehensible? The outside is pretty clear. Even when you go inside, labeling is very clear, understanding what it is that you're supposed to do there and able to get around. Yep. Is it well organized? Well, similar to the website. Computers are in one area, phones are in another area, iPads are in another area. So things are pretty well organized. Not only are they well organized, but it's consistent from the website to the store. So from a user experience structure point of view, it does a really good job. It's clear and comprehensible. It's consistent. It's well organized. Can I find my way around? It's not a huge store. It's easy to kind of find where it is that I might want to be. And if I have problems, then there's people with T-shirts on and you can ask questions of. So same criteria on a website and on a store. The one thing that's interesting here when it comes from a structure point of view, so most stores, when you go into them, they have a designated place that you can go and pay for something. Like there's a lot of stores that you go to where it says pay here or, cashier or checkout. Even though it's a store, the Apple store doesn't have anything like that, which is fine now after I've been there for a while. But the first time I went and I was like walking around going, well, where do I pay? Where do I pay? Because it didn't match my mental model. And so, so I went up to somebody and said, how do I pay? And they, whipped out their Apple device. And so, you can make an argument for, okay, they're not matching the mental model of their users. Is that a problem? Or are they Apple and are they kind of like blazing the path? Either way that they choose to set things up, the reason that you ask the question is so that you can have the conversation. There may be some one-off store that decides that, well, if Apple does it, maybe we should do it that way. But you can have a conversation with other people on your team, other people in the company about, is this going to make sense to the user? And use that criteria in an objective way rather than, hey, somebody just thought that was a great idea, let's do that. Which is kind of the thing that we're trying to get away from. Okay, different channel. So anybody here familiar with field glass? No? Okay. This is enterprise software. And it helps companies to manage their flexible workforce. So it's used by, and I have a small company, and I work with a lot of other larger companies, and I'm an approved vendor, et cetera, et cetera. So I have to use this software on a regular basis. So I wanted an example of a software interface, and I wanted an example of something that really I thought was a very poor user experience. And this definitely qualifies. So this is something that whenever I start a project with a larger company, I have to set up a project and kind of track, how to get paid and things like that. I have to use this software to do it. So this pretty much gets poor marks across the board. It does not make sense to the user. I'm sure it makes sense to somebody, but as a user, it does not make sense to me. I don't understand how things are set up. Even though everything is in English, it kind of doesn't make sense to me as to why it's labeled that way, what I'm supposed to be doing next. I don't understand the organization. It's just like completely confusing. It's so bad, and it's well known throughout its industry that it's not set up so well that they have help documentation that will take you step by step. It's like, here's what you need to do first with a snapshot. Here's what you need to do second. Here's what you need to do third. And it was even with the help documentation, it was impossible to to complete the task. So I had to actually call somebody. I had to call somebody and say, how do I get through this? What am I supposed to be doing? And they had to like walk me through one thing at a time. Well, here's what you do first. Here's what you do second, in order to get it all set up. So evaluating from a user experience standpoint, it doesn't do well at all. So, however, it's possible to use the same criteria to evaluate this as well as other things, which is kind of what I was looking for. It's like I need the same criteria to be able to talk to anybody about, is this a good framework for a user experience? Am I able to find my way around? Do I know where I am? Do I know what I need to do next? And what does that look like? How do we talk about it so that, if I was ever hired by these people, I could kind of start to have a conversation with them about it.
One of the points that I think the first speaker yesterday made was that intuitive solutions do not need instructions.
Absolutely.
And the idea, because I've never found that online help was very helpful
No.
for any of my participants.
That's true. And one of the
It's not obvious what the site is for, what you need to do, like you said.
Right. And usually anytime that you need extensive help documentation in order to get through an experience, that's an indication that something is wrong with the framework. That's just like, And so, so if you are working on a project that does require extensive help documentation, you can start to ask yourself some of these questions to be able to kind of go, okay, well, what's wrong with it exactly? How is it broken? How do we need to fix it? So, good point. So I've talked about a website. I've talked about a brick and mortar store. I've talked about enterprise software. So there's other, these criteria can be used across all sorts of channels. And so the next one that I want to talk about is actually a poster that I worked on. So this poster is a customer experience map. This is the scrubbed version. So, there's a few things that I couldn't show you, but that I'll tell you about. To kind of illustrate how it does well as for the user experience framework. So this is a poster that shows a customer experience map. The company wanted to better connect the employees to the vision that the company had, and they wanted to make sure that it was user-centric, customer-centric. So they tasked me with, putting together a poster, and rather than talking about the process that I used to do it and whatnot, really kind of evaluating. I wanted to evaluate. It's a poster. It's a finished product. From a user experience point of view, how well did it do? How successful was it? And so I asked myself, okay, does it make sense to the user? Does it make sense to the employees in the company? Well, one of the things that you can't see is that we use branding, the company's branding, brand colors and whatnot, in order to convey that, this is something that pertains to you. And that was helpful. We also, there's some stuff that I had to remove, but, there was the company's vision that was printed on the bottom. And so the company's vision was something, it was a phrase that was known throughout the entire company. And so it was a way to, using things that are familiar to the employees as a way to kind of bring them in and to start to engage them was one of the things that made this very successful. So, I would use phrases throughout the entire poster that they were familiar with from the company, from the mission statement, that were things that they could kind of latch onto and go, oh, you're talking about something that's familiar to me, but there's also things that are not familiar to me. So, let me read more about it. It was clear and comprehensible, and actually one of the ways that I knew that after a while, this is like Rev 6 or 7, was that I would put it in front of people and they go, oh my gosh, I get it. So, which was very helpful. And again, because it used some of the language that they were familiar with, but also kind of filled in some blanks of things that they were not familiar with, it became really very successful. Was it well organized? Well, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, things in order. So using, it's a pretty simplistic example of using different ways to organize things ways that make sense to the target audience. And it did make sense to the target audience. Were they able to find their way around? Well, it's a poster, so it's kind of hard to get lost in a poster, although some posters are pretty confusing. We used icons, and so, we have a key for the icons. We have more information available because there were, metrics kind of scattered throughout the diagram. And so we have, a way for them to find out more if they wanted to know more. The other thing about this particular poster is that it was presented in such a way that if people were interested in one aspect of it, they could easily focus on that, and everything else kind of fell to the background. Because I would ask people, well, what did you like about this? And they would, focus on, the fact that some bubbles were dark and some bubbles were light, and that's all they got out of it. I'm like, great. And then, so other people talked about, yeah, I read this thing over here, and that was just so amazing to me. And that was the thing that they got out of it. And so, being able to focus on one area and not be distracted by other areas. Okay, that's kind of great. Was another thing that made this really successful.
What are the 1, 2, 3? I mean, why do you call the bubbles 1, 2, 3 instead of giving a specific name? What does it?
Well, for the actual deliverable that I gave the client, they did have another name.
Okay.
But
This is just
I can't show you that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So are they steps? Is it like a life cycle? Or what, is it a process? I mean,
It's a customer experience map, and so it's phases of the customer journey.
okay.
So yeah.
enlightenment.
Can't I really
Okay.
can't say much. So again, using the same criteria in order to kind of evaluate the structure of this user experience. Same criteria used across multiple channels. It's even possible to use the criteria in an experience that is completely offline. So I wanted to evaluate something that was completely not digital at all. I wanted to evaluate the structure of an experience that in no way involved technology. So in 2010, I took a trip to Haiti. And so as part of working on these evaluation criteria, I evaluated, how easy was it for me to navigate through the entire experience, and can I use that evaluation criteria in any situation? So question number one, does it make sense? Well, there was a lot in Haiti that didn't absolutely not make sense to me. It was a foreign country. They did things really differently. I showed you an example of the Apple Store in Los Gatos as a place to buy computers. This is the place if you want to buy computers in Haiti, the second largest city in Haiti. If you want to buy a computer, this is where you go. So, it looks really different, just very different. So there was a lot that was very, very different. This is an example of a house that somebody lives in. And so, when I'm first looking at things, I'm like, wow, this is really different. Am I going to be able to find my way around? But then being able to kind of latch on the things that are familiar to me. It's like, this is a house. It has, 4 walls and windows and doors, and I live in a house and it has walls and windows and doors. And even though things might look a little different, there's things that are very, very familiar to me. So even being able to go around in a place that's wildly different and kind of latch onto those things that are familiar to me is a really important criteria for any kind of UX framework. So if you're ever building something that's like, this may or may not be very familiar to other people that you have to build for, make sure that you're building in some kind of affordance that is very familiar, no matter what it might be. Is it familiar? Does it make sense? Is it clear and comprehensible? Are things well organized? As it turns out, things did happen to be pretty well organized. Once I didn't rely on how I usually organize things, but kind of looked for underlying structural similarities. It was easy to kind of see how things were organized throughout throughout the experience. And was I able to find my way around? So a lot of people find their way around by understanding landmarks, by understanding, what are the paths that you take, and what are the different nodes of that path. And so as long as I'm, kind of looking at things from that point of view, it's easy in any situation to kind of find my way around, as long as I can see, what is a path, understanding where it is that I want to go and where I am in relation to that. And so that's something that you can navigate in a digital space as well as a physical space. So just to summarize, and I think I'm finishing a little bit early. Just to summarize, the main thing that was important to me in kind of doing this exercise is to find ways that I can talk about the work that I do that's objective and not subjective. Whenever anybody comes to me and they're like, well, I like this or I don't like this, to be able to understand, what is it that like what is working, what is not working, and how can we have a conversation about that in a way that is consistent within the field. And these criteria, they seem to hold up pretty well across multiple channels, which is what I was really interested in. Mainly so I could get away from the the CEO who's like, I don't like red. I'm like, does red not make sense to the user? Does it make it not usable or inconsistent or less flexible? Is using red making things not organized? It's like, let's figure out what those objective criteria are. So if anybody's interested in kind of knowing more about that or continuing in the conversation, at the Information Architecture Summit in Minneapolis in April, we're going to be having a roundtable about developing a language of critique for information architecture. So everybody's welcome to join in if you have any interest. If you want to find out more, you can go to reframe-ia.org. And I think there's time left over. Does anybody have any questions or comments?
So what is your method? What would you call the method that you use?
So it's mainly it's a framework for evaluating user experience. I don't know if that's a method or.
It's like an expert. Is that what you would call it, like an expert review?
A heuristic review.
Okay.
Yeah.
Could you show the slide that had the like I only got like Abby Cover, Jakob Nielsen, who I'm familiar with, and Lou Rosenfeld.
Sure.
There were other resources you could list. I think it was slide 2 or 3 or something.
Yep, I can go back there.
Oh, there we go. Okay, Peter Moorville.
Yeah, Peter Moorville is one of the authors of the Polar Bear book, Information Architecture for the World Wide Web. Any other questions or comments? Okay.
Is there like a way to access the ISO standards without paying for them? Or you always have to pay?
I have not found that way.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah. So the recommendation that I acted on was find an older standard, or for one of them for the www user interfaces, there's a book that was like $5 that kind of like summarized it for me. And I'm like, okay, we're going to use those. Yeah, they're for being international standards, they're kind of hard to get a hold of.
I know if they want you to follow it, you would think.
Yeah,
They'll give it to you for free.
you'd think. You'd think. Yep. Other questions? Okay. Thank you. Thank you for your time.